The glass door rotated slowly behind him, but inside Maison door, the air seemed to freeze instantly. Ethan Cole, in a worn jacket and scuffed leather shoes, stepped into a sea of glittering crystal chandeliers where every gaze, sharp as a blade, turned on him at once. In that moment, he was no longer a guest, but an intruder, unwelcome and out of place. At the reception desk, Oliver Kane swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he held the menu, as if the very presence of this stranger had shattered the carefully polished order of the room. His eyes flicked nervously toward the manager approaching, Claudia Voss. Claudia moved with the majesty of a queen. Her black dress hugged her frame, every step of her high heels striking the marble floor like the blows of fate. She stopped in front of Ethan, her cold eyes sweeping from head to toe, lingering on his dusty shoes, a mocking smile curving on her lips. "We do not serve people like you." The words rang across the hall, crisp and cutting. No need to raise her voice, yet the entire room fell silent. Guests held their breath. A few at the VIP tables chuckled. Gregory Hunt, a silver-haired businessman accustomed to deference, let out a deliberate scoff, making sure it carried. "How amusing! Even beggars want to sit in Maison d'Or." The clink of cutlery on porcelain rose like cruel applause. Some lifted their wine glasses, whispering mockery. No one spoke in defense. Ethan did not react. He simply placed a glossy black card on the counter, the light from the chandeliers catching it so it flashed like a blade. Oliver froze for an instant, his heart pounding, for he knew well that kind of card was not something just anyone could touch. Before he could say a word, Claudia tilted her head and gave a dismissive smile. "Fake cards are everywhere these days. Don't waste my time." Two security guards approached. One laid a hand on Ethan's shoulder, firm but restrained. Not violent, yet enough to erase a man's presence. The room hummed with whispers, phones discreetly raised. To them, it was not injustice unfolding, but a spectacle to recount at their next party. Oliver's eyes stayed on the man's face. There was no panic there, no anger, only a dangerous stillness, like the calm surface of a lake hiding unfathomable depths. He wanted to speak, to check the reservation system, to confirm, but Claudia's icy gaze froze him where he stood. In that single look, he understood. If he dared open his mouth, his young career would end tonight. Ethan allowed the guiding hand to lead him away, each step on the marble floor sounding like a countdown bell. The entire hall believed they were witnessing a man's shameful defeat, but within him, he was silently recording every glance, every laugh, every complicit silence. Gregory raised his glass, his arrogant smile widening. Claudia stood tall, arms crossed, pride gleaming in her eyes. To them, victory was assured, but Oliver felt something different. That calm was not the resignation of a humiliated man. It was the patience of someone waiting for the right moment to strike back. A chill crept down his spine, a foreboding that made it impossible to look away. When the revolving door opened and Ethan's figure disappeared into the night, the hall quickly returned to laughter and clinking glasses. Yet Oliver remained still, his palms damp with sweat. He did not know why, but his instincts screamed that the man cast out as a nobody was in fact a storm waiting to break. And when the storm came, not a single crystal glass would remain whole. Outside, the laughter of those wrapped in silk still echoed. But in Ethan Cole's mind, memory surged back like a flood. He saw himself 20 years earlier, a 20-year-old boy in a torn dishwashing apron, swallowed by the sweltering heat of a Brooklyn kitchen. The dishwasher spewed clouds of steam. The sting of harsh detergent burned into the cracks of his hands, leaving them blistered and raw. Each night he curled up on a sack of rice in the corner, a thin blanket failing to shield him from the damp chill that seeped through the tiled floor. No one called him by name. They only barked, "Hey, dish boy, hurry up!" Every time the kitchen doors swung open, he heard the mocking laughter of waiters in crisp white shirts, the faint trail of their cologne drifting past like a cruel reminder. They walked by without a glance, as if he were nothing more than an object in the shadows. In their eyes, he did not exist, just a stain, a rag that breathed. Ethan bowed his head, held his breath, and swallowed every ounce of contempt hurled at him. Not because he was weak, but because he knew that if he dared to answer back, he would lose even the small chance he had to survive. When night fell and the kitchen grew quiet, he listened to the constant hum of the industrial refrigerator. Hunger clawed at his stomach, but he never stole food, never risked the last shred of dignity he held on to. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Endure. One day, you'll walk away from this place." That memory tormented him, but it also carved a truth deep within. A person's dignity can be crushed by a single look, a dismissive gesture. And if he wanted to change his life, he had to step out of that shadow. One evening, he opened his wallet and counted again and again. 5 worn $10 bills, so fragile they felt as if they might tear in his fingers. Only $50, no family, no support. But Ethan knew that if he stayed in that kitchen corner, he would wither away. That night he stepped into the streets, his torn shoes blistering his feet with every step. He knocked on the doors of diners and coffee shops, most slamming their doors in his face without even hearing him out. Until at last, in a small cafe glowing with dim yellow light, an old owner agreed to give him a chance. Not as a cook, not as a manager, only as a busboy, carrying trays and wiping tables. Yet Ethan saw it as soil where he could plant his seeds. Day after day, he served with a quiet smile, silently observing. He memorized how the manager spoke to guests, how the cashier handled the register, how the suppliers delivered goods. He scribbled frantic notes on crumpled scraps of paper, every shaky line filled with determination. Slowly, he understood. A restaurant did not live by its menu alone. It lived by how it treated each human being, whether a paying guest or the janitor sweeping the floor. Ethan began to dream, no longer of a full meal, but of a place, a restaurant where dishwashers were not treated with contempt, where the smile of an employee mattered as much as the food on the plate. That dream burned in the heart of the poor young man. And that dream, years later, became the foundation of an empire called Cole Hospitality. The memory faded, the cruel laughter of the present merging with the shouted orders of the old kitchen. Ethan Cole, the man just thrown out in humiliation from Maison door, clenched his fists tight. He knew that one day, all those who judged others by their appearance would be forced to bow their heads, and that moment was closer than ever. The night spent knocking on restaurant doors gradually faded into the past. By the age of 25, Ethan Cole still had nothing in his hands, yet his eyes carried a fire that could not be extinguished. He scraped together every dollar from his meager wages as a waiter and rented a shabby little room, its walls peeling, a folding bed creaking with every move, and one oversized dream. On scraps of paper he sketched layouts of tables, the flow of the kitchen, even the smile that every staff member should carry when serving guests. He knew he had no capital, no official managerial experience, but he had something else. The memories of someone who had once been treated as nothing, and the determination to build a place where no one would ever endure that again. That year, he opened his first restaurant. It was no palace, just 4 cracked walls, an old stove bought from a liquidation sale, and a hand-painted sign hanging askew. But for Ethan, it was a small kingdom. He scrubbed every wooden floorboard himself until it gleamed like glass. He tied on an apron, stepped into the kitchen, and cooked every dish with all his heart. On the first day, only 3 curious strangers wandered in. They expected nothing, but when they left, they smiled. That smile, something money could never buy, became the fuel that kept Ethan going. He hired 1 server, then a cook, then someone to clean. With each employee, Ethan did not only ask about their shifts, he asked about their families, their dreams, even the worn-out shoes on their feet. When someone was exhausted, he did not scold. He rolled up his sleeves and worked alongside them. When tips ran low, he quietly slipped extra into their pay envelopes. Loyalty is not demanded. It is cultivated. They stayed not because of contracts, but because they felt seen, respected, valued. During the hardest months, when the cash register stood empty, Ethan never abandoned his principle. Everyone who walks through these doors, whether guest or staff, deserves respect. That philosophy was what kept his little restaurant alive through the storms. Year after year, from one modest corner, Cole hospitality began to spread its wings. More restaurants opened in new neighborhoods, then in other states. People came to know the brand not only for good food, but for the warmth and kindness that filled every space. Soon, the press began to write about Ethan Cole. They called him the miracle who rose from the dish pit to become a titan of dining. His net worth was calculated in billions. But Ethan avoided the cameras. He did not wear shining suits to flaunt his power. He understood that true power was not found in people bowing to a name, but in how they behaved when they thought he was no one at all. And so, Ethan chose the shadows. He remained anonymous when visiting his own restaurants, dressing simply, blending into the crowd. To see people's true nature, without the mask of false respect. Ethan believed that the true worth of an empire is not measured by profit, but by how it treats the invisible. The scornful looks of the past, the stinging nights at the dish sink had taught him this truth. And now, that philosophy had become the backbone of Cole hospitality, an empire not built on gold and silver, but on dignity. No one inside that glittering room knew the truth. Just a few weeks earlier, in a sealed office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan tower, Ethan Cole had signed the contract that placed the entire Maison chain, the pride of the elite, squarely in his hands. There was no champagne uncorked, no celebratory feast, only the cold, precise stroke of a pen. On paper, nameless subsidiaries and shell corporations appeared like smoke screens. Nowhere was the name Cole Hospitality to be seen, and that was exactly his design. Ethan understood all too well that when power reveals itself, people change their masks. Employees bow lower, service grows quicker, customers feign reverence. But all of it is nothing more than a polished veneer, not the truth. He did not want the truth hidden. He wanted to witness the real face of Maison, a place famed for its luxury, but had it preserved its soul of decency? The only person who knew the truth was Tamara Crosswell, his closest aide. She was the one who handled the legal traces, navigated the labyrinth of procedures, and erased every link to Ethan. She booked a table under a name so ordinary that no one would give it a second glance. Mr. Gray. That evening, Tamara called him, her voice steady. No trace leads back. You can walk in as a stranger. No one will know. Ethan stood across the street, watching Maison doors' glass doors gleam like a golden gate. The light spilled across his worn shoes. He nodded faintly, a cold smile brushing his lips. Good. That is exactly what I want. In that moment, memory clawed at his mind again. The image of his bare feet long ago pressing against cold tile, his hands cracked from chemicals. He remembered precisely the feeling of being judged by his clothes, his shoes, the dust on his skin. And tonight, he wanted to see how those basking under chandeliers would judge him when they believed the man before them had nothing. He pulled his frayed collar tighter and drew in a long, steady breath. Maison d'Or was not a destination. It was a test. To the diners, it would be just another lavish evening. But to Ethan, it was a tribunal. And in that court, the one on trial was not him, but the true culture of the restaurant itself. He stepped slowly across the street, the light stretching his shadow along the pavement. In his mind, there was no thought of profit, no thought of market share. Only a single question pressing deeper and deeper. Did Maison d'Or still hold on to its dignity, or had it sold its soul to counterfeit smiles? The answer waited just beyond that door. The moment Ethan's foot touched the velvet carpet of Maison d'Or, the entire room seemed to halt. From tables draped in white linen, the eyes of the guests swept over him like blades. A man in a worn coat and scuffed shoes had stepped into a place that was accustomed only to diamonds and silk. Soft laughter rippled through the air. A woman in a red silk gown leaned toward her companion, lips curling into mockery. "He's lost, clearly doesn't belong here." Gregory Hunt, a golden ring gleaming on his hand, lowered his newspaper with a smirk. He tilted his glass of wine and spoke in a tone meant to carry across the hall. "So, Maison d'Or serves beggars now?" Laughter spread like oil across water. Forks tapped plates, glasses chimed, together forming a cruel orchestra. Ethan remained calm. He walked toward the reception desk. Behind it, Oliver Kane, the young attendant, gripped the menu tightly, his eyes torn between duty and fear. He caught a glimpse of the gleaming black card Ethan laid on the counter, the chandeliers reflecting off its surface like an undeniable statement. But before Oliver could reach for it, Claudia Voss appeared, dressed in a fitted black gown. Her smile was cold. She stood before Ethan, her gaze sweeping him from head to toe, stopping at the card. Her lips curved ever so slightly, sharp and icy. "Fake cards are everywhere. We don't serve people like you here." A whistle rose from the VIP table, followed by a chorus of laughter. A few phones lifted discreetly, their screens glowing as they recorded the moment. No one saw injustice, only a performance for their amusement. Oliver swallowed hard. Every instinct in him screamed to check, to clear this man's name. But one frozen glance from Claudia sealed his lips shut. His trembling hand withdrew from the keyboard. Two security guards approached. One placed a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder, not violent, but enough to erase his presence. The room fell utterly silent. All waited for the spectacle, the moment the outsider would be expelled from their domain. Gregory took another sip of wine, satisfaction spreading across his face. Claudia folded her arms, her eyes alight with triumph. Only Oliver felt his chest twist, because in those calm eyes, he saw no humiliation. He saw the silence of a man holding a secret, a storm restrained, waiting to break. As the revolving glass door closed behind Ethan, the room erupted in laughter and clinking glasses, as though they had just witnessed a comedy. But Oliver stood frozen, his heart heavy. He knew, with an instinct sharper than ever before, that the man they had cast out was no ordinary figure. And when he returned, Maison d'Or would never be the same again. 20 minutes. Just 20 minutes after being escorted out through the glass doors of Maison d'Or, Ethan Cole's figure appeared once more. But this time, he was no longer an outcast under scornful eyes. He was a storm about to break. The revolving door opened with a soft sound, and the room froze in an instant. Laughter died, strangled mid-air. The very eyes that had mocked now stared in bewilderment. Ethan walked in, still in his worn coat, still in his scuffed shoes, but in his eyes burned a cold steel fire. Gregory Hunt, lifting his glass of wine, found his hand trembling, the liquid sloshing over the rim onto the table. The glass slipped, shattered on the floor, red wine spreading like a stain of blood. No one laughed. Claudia Voss stiffened. The arrogance etched into her face cracked, just for a moment. Her voice broke out, high and urgent, so unlike the icy tone from before. You dare come back here?" Ethan did not answer. He walked across the grand hall, each step deliberate, each one echoing like a drum of judgment. Guests avoided his gaze, some bowing their heads quickly, others clutching their glasses as if they were shields. He did not linger awkwardly at the reception desk, nor wait for permission. Ethan pulled out a chair at the VIP table, the table reserved for the powerful and the privileged, and sat down as though it had always been his rightful place. The gesture was too calm to be defiance, yet too commanding for anyone to deny. The room sank into heavy silence. Behind the desk, Oliver Kane's chest rose and fell quickly. He had sensed this moment would come, but never imagined it would arrive with such force. Ethan drew out his phone. The sound of his old coat rustling was unremarkable, yet every pair of eyes locked onto the motion. He tapped a few buttons and placed the phone on the table. The speaker filled the room with a steady, clear female voice. "Good evening, Mr. Cole. The board is assembled. The meeting has begun." The silence shattered without a single word. Sharp intakes of breath, eyes widening in disbelief. No one could draw air. The name Cole echoed against the marble walls, illuminating a truth they did not want to believe. The man humiliated, cast out just moments ago, was in fact the new owner of the entire restaurant chain. Gregory Hunt's face drained of color, his smug smile erased as if it had never existed. The shards of glass at his feet glittered like blades cutting into his pride. Claudia Voss stood frozen. Her lashes trembled, her lips pressed tight, then parted as though to speak, but no sound emerged. The mask of authority fell, revealing a face pale and hollow. Ethan sat there, without raising his voice, without declaration. One brief call, one name spoken aloud on the speaker was enough to shatter every illusion. The man once rejected had returned, not to seek approval, but to place Maison d'Or before the judgment seat of truth. The speaker went silent, yet the room remained heavy, as though crushed by an invisible weight. Every gaze turned toward Ethan Cole, but he did not look at them. His eyes locked on the reception desk, where Oliver Kane trembled before the glow of the computer screen. "Check the reservation system," Ethan said, his voice low but razor-sharp. Oliver hesitated, then his fingers began to tap across the keyboard. Within seconds, the monitor lit up, its words cutting like blades. 17 official complaints, unresolved. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone swallowed hard. Gregory Hunt furrowed his brow, but dared not speak. Oliver scrolled further, each line peeling back another layer of Maison d'Or's polished facade. Guests refused service for being unsuitable. Staff insulting customers publicly. Tables canceled without reason. And at the bottom, another list appeared, marked in ominous red. 6 confidential settlements. The air thickened to stone. Oliver's eyes flicked to Ethan, then to Claudia Voss. Her face had gone pale, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her skin. Oliver's dry lips parted as he read aloud. All 6 cases directly involve manager Claudia Voss. A sharp gasp cut through the silence. Somewhere a spoon clattered onto a plate, its metallic clang tearing the stillness apart. Claudia staggered back half a step, her lips trembling. Those records, they're not accurate. They were misunderstandings. Her voice cracked, breaking mid-sentence, and in that moment, another voice rose, soft but steady. Isabella Reyes, a young waitress with flowers still dusted on her face, stepped forward. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned with courage. She once called me a stain in the kitchen, Isabella said, her voice tightening. In front of colleagues, in front of customers. I stayed silent, but I never forgot. The entire hall went still. Cutlery fell silent. A strange, electric tension filled the air. Claudia's mouth opened, but no words came, because from the back of the room, a man's voice carried forward. Dominic Hale, the head chef, towering, his coat stained with grease. He rarely left the kitchen, yet now his voice rolled out deep and unyielding like grinding steel. I saw her humiliate the staff. I stayed silent, and that silence was my fault. His words struck like a hammer, no longer the plea of a young waitress, but the admission of the most powerful man in the kitchen. And when he bowed his head, the truth could no longer be denied. The diners sat frozen, some lifting their heads, others lowering them. There was no laughter, no scorn, only the suffocating weight of truth laid bare. Ethan did not smile, nor show triumph. He only looked around and spoke evenly. If you have ever endured it, stand up. A beat of silence. Then from the back, a single hand rose, then another, then more, until dozens of hands reached into the air, trembling but firm, a living indictment. Claudia Voss staggered back, her eyes darting wildly across the faces that once obeyed her. But tonight, they did not bow. And under the glow of the chandeliers, Maison d'Or witnessed what it had never seen before. The wall of silence had shattered. The raised hands remained aloft, like torches blazing across the opulent hall, burning away the polished illusion of Maison d'Or. Claudia Voss stood trembling, the authority that once defined her reduced to a fragile shadow. Sweat gathered at her temple, her lips quivered, desperate to cling to power melting away like candle wax. You don't understand anything, Claudia burst out, her voice sharp yet broken. Everything I did was to protect the restaurant's image. Without me, this place would have collapsed long ago. No one replied. The silence of the collective cut sharper than 1,000 arguments. A guest in a tuxedo shook his head, disappointment in his eyes. Across the room, a woman quietly set her wine glass down, ashamed of having laughed at Ethan earlier. Claudia's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, but all she found were cold stares. Isabella Reyes bowed her head, tears brimming but her stance unwavering. Dominic Hale stood tall, silent but resolute. Dozens of staff kept their hands raised, each one a living indictment. "You betray me?" Claudia screamed, her voice cracking. She turned toward the staff, her words breaking with sobs. I carried the weight so you didn't have to. Every decision, every cut, every harsh word, it was all for this brand. But no one believed her. They knew too well that humiliation is not protection and lost wages are not sacrifice. It was cruelty, sugar-coated as discipline. Ethan Cole rose slowly. His voice, calm and steady, rang like a bell through the grand hall. Luxury is not built by stripping away human dignity. The room froze. The words dropped onto the marble floor like iron, leaving no one able to breathe deeply. Claudia faltered, her eyes wild, searching for an argument. But there was nothing left to grasp. "You don't understand!" she screamed, her voice raw. "I did everything to preserve this reputation. Without me, this place would have collapsed long ago," Ethan answered, his tone cold as steel. "No, Claudia. You protected nothing. You masked cruelty under the guise of discipline. You ruled with fear. And tonight, the truth has stripped it bare." He lowered his gaze, pressed a button on his phone, and set it on the table. The speaker crackled, a voice from HR ringing sharp and final. "Confirmed. Claudia Voss's contract is terminated, effective immediately." A small ping chimed from the internal system. Her name vanished from the screen as if it had never existed. In that moment, she seemed to fall into an abyss. Her legs trembled, knees buckling, hands clutched the table's edge but found no anchor. She lifted her eyes, searching desperately for a sympathetic glance, a nod of support. There was none. Every back turned away. Even the crystal chandeliers seemed harsher now, exposing her bare and broken in defeat. Claudia Voss, once a force within Maison d'Or, now stood stripped of power, without title, without allies, without a place. The room held its breath, witnessing the collapse of a false monument. And in that silence, everyone understood. This was not merely the end of one person, but the beginning of a change that could never be undone. The room sank into a strange silence. No more mocking laughter, no glasses raised in arrogance, only eyes cast downward, heavy with the weight of collective guilt. Those who had once applauded Claudia now kept their hands hidden under the table, trembling with shame. Gregory Hunt, who had laughed so smugly before, stared at the floor, his eyes darting away, his hands rubbing against each other as if he could somehow erase the stain of what had just happened. Isabella stood among her colleagues, for the first time feeling the presence of justice. Dominic Hale, the head chef, gave her a quiet nod, his gaze carrying both regret and resolve. Other staff slowly lowered their hands, no longer trembling. In their eyes, something had awakened, the understanding that silence was no longer an option. Ethan Cole turned, his gaze fixing on Oliver Kane. The young receptionist stood behind the desk, shoulders tense, lips moving as if to speak, yet choked by fear. Sweat glistened on his brow, his hands still resting on the keyboard, his heart pounding against his ribs. Ethan walked toward him slowly, each footstep echoing, steady and heavy. The entire hall held its breath. Oliver lowered his head, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry." Ethan stopped, his eyes locked on his. His voice was neither harsh nor angry, but steady, heavy as a hammer. "You saw the truth. You could have spoken, but you chose silence." Oliver clenched his fists, his chest tightening. Images flashed through his mind. Claudia's contemptuous stare, Gregory's mocking laughter, and the calm eyes of the man he had helped cast out. They cut into him like blades. I was afraid," Oliver admitted, his voice shaking. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of being branded a traitor, and I stayed silent. Silence swept over the hall once more. Ethan gave a slight nod, his eyes softening. He spoke slowly. Silence is a mistake, but you still hold something important, the ability to feel, the ability to regret. And today, you are no longer silent. Oliver lifted his gaze, his eyes red and wet. In that moment, he saw a different path opening before him, not one of fear, but of courage. Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice steady. Redemption is not earned by apology, but by action. Begin today. A ripple of whispers spread across the room. Many staff lowered their heads, some nodded softly, their eyes flickering with a spark of newfound belief. For the first time, the heavy air of Maison was not filled only with fear and oppression. Under the glow of the chandeliers, they began to feel something else. The chance to change. Ethan looked around the room, his voice ringing like a vow. From this moment, Maison will no longer be a stage for arrogance. It will be a place of dignity. The words, simple yet powerful, fell and reached every heart. In Oliver's eyes, for the first time in many months, a glimmer of hope appeared. And in the eyes of the staff, something long absent returned, the belief that their voices truly had value. No one in the room dared to breathe too deeply. The crystal chandeliers still shone, but no longer with the ostentation of luxury. Instead, their light seemed to expose every hidden corner. Claudia Voss had fallen from her throne. Oliver Kane now stood upright with renewed eyes, and the staff looked at one another as if awakening from a long dream. Ethan Cole stood at the center of the room. He did not need to shout. It was the calm in his voice that made every word echo, cutting deep into every heart. I did not come here to fire people. I came to keep those who are worthy. The whispers faded. Guests and staff alike listened intently. Ethan's eyes swept across every face. There was fear, there was regret, and there was hope. Then he continued. Power, money, status, all of it is meaningless unless tested. And today, Maison has been tested. It has failed. But failure is not an ending. It is a chance to begin again. In the corner, Isabella Reyes clasped her hands tightly against her chest. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of release. Dominic Hale gave a small nod, as if making a vow never to remain silent again. Oliver stood behind the desk, chest rising and falling, his eyes glimmering with newfound resolve. Ethan paused, then lowered his voice. Yet every word still rang like a bell. Luxury is not found on a gold-plated plate. Luxury is respect. It is when the dishwasher is valued as much as the paying guest. It is when no one feels invisible. In that moment, the entire hall seemed to awaken. A single pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then more. The sound of applause spread from staff to guests. These were no longer the hollow claps of flattery, but real applause born from recognition and emotion. Isabella bowed her head, tears streaming as her lips whispered, "Thank you." Dominic placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes bright for the first time in years. Oliver breathed heavily as though freed from invisible chains. The thunderous applause rose beneath the chandeliers, shattering the wall of silence that had bound Maison for too long. Ethan looked at them all, not with a proud smile, but with a quiet nod. In his eyes was the sternness of a man who had known humiliation, and the compassion of one who understood the value of a second chance. That night, Maison did not simply change its manager. It changed its soul. Those who had once been silent found their voices again. Those who had mocked learned to bow their heads, and an empire was reborn, not upon marble floors or beneath chandeliers, but upon one foundation alone: human dignity. As an observer, I can affirm this. The story of Maison was not simply the unmasking of a tyrannical manager. It was clear proof that every empire, no matter how dazzling, can collapse if it lacks the foundation of human dignity. True luxury does not lie in crystal chandeliers or fine wine, but in how we treat those who seem the most invisible. If you believe that respect must be the starting point of every organization, hit like to help spread this message. Do not forget to subscribe so you can continue to journey with us through stories that expose injustice and affirm the value of human beings. And before you leave, share a comment with the short phrase, "Keep dignity," as a reminder that real luxury begins with respect.